Okay, guys. So, what I was trying to talk about in class, but couldn't because of audio issues, is talking about what is right versus accurate. Okay, so you've gotten to this point where you have, this kind of general outline of things. You're ready to start placing in values. You're ready to start, essentially coloring this with your pencil. What I'm doing is I'm layering in values really slowly. So even though I can see in this triangle here, this part of the gem, it's pure black, I'm not going to go over here and just do it straight up pure black. I'm doing it dark. And now I notice, I've also worked on the little brad here. They look about the same value. If I squint, I can really see where it becomes blurry. Right? So if I squint and things become blurry, I can tell that this is much darker than this. So I need to go back and add a little bit more. So this is what I mean by building things up, building values up, going at it slowly. It doesn't have to actually be slow, but it shouldn't be instantaneous. Okay. So when I talk about what's right versus what's accurate for your drawing, doing what is accurate is doing everything exactly as you see it in your photograph. Okay. Sometimes, though, that doesn't always work for our drawings. So, for instance, this little brad here, I'm not able to make every single tiny, tiny, tiny highlight there. So, what I have to do is create highlights that are accurate enough, right? It's accurate enough, but it just looks right. So, even at the very end, it won't match my photograph. But if we looked at the drawing by itself, if we ignored the photograph, we wouldn't be looking at this and saying, "Oh, that's really weird. That doesn't look like a Brad, or that doesn't look like it should be part of this drawing." Okay? So I'm doing what seems right. I'm going in, I'm going back and forth with my pencil, with my eraser, because sometimes, especially with tiny little highlights like this, it's much easier to give yourself a dark surface, like right here. Take your eraser, going in, brightening it up a little bit, and then kind of redrawing that area. Okay. So I'm looking at the key things, like there's this dark little bit. It gets generally lighter on the bottom half of this whole brad. So I'm going to keep that, right? I'm going to keep this area light, let this other area up here be a little bit darker. And then one thing I notice is that these highlights are really crisp and sharp. So I'll go in, again, going back and forth with my eraser, especially for these tiny little areas, and creating highlights that maybe don't match my photograph, but they work for my drawing. So that's what I'm talking about when I say right versus accurate. Accurate would be a literal photocopy. Doing what's right is what works for my drawing. So even if it is not exactly like my photograph, right? If I'm being dishonest or I'm lying about my photograph, eventually in the very end, it doesn't look right at it right now. But if I zoom out, especially if I zoom out, that looks like a highlighted brad on a piece of jewelry. Does it match my photograph exactly? No. But does it work for my drawing? Absolutely. So, as you start adding in value, do not psych yourself out or do not beat yourself up if it is not exactly like your photograph, right? It is okay if it is not exactly like your photograph. As long as it looks right, it feels right, it doesn't give you that, something's off here kind of look, then you're okay. All right. So, especially like with all of these tiny little jewels and things, all these little highlights, I'm not going to aim to get every little bit there, right? I'm not going to go and I'm trying to zoom in here. There we go. Right, so like in that diamond, I'm not going to try to get every single little thing in there. I'm going to give myself, I'm going to keep those major pieces. And do something that resembles, in this case, a diamond. So you can see it's darker underneath here. I'm going to keep that. Following general value rules, right? If something is darker, let it be darker. It's really those tiny little details that we're not super obsessed with. Right? So when we look at this thing from this distance, where the camera's at right now, it could very easily and believably be a diamond, right? Or some kind of jewel that is reflecting light. Does it match my photograph? Absolutely not, right? Absolutely not. So I am being dishonest to the photograph, but I'm doing it because there are certain limits with my paper. So doing what's right is finding that in between. How am I being truthful to the photograph, but also working within the limits of what I can do with a pencil and my paper? Okay? So that's what right versus accurate is.